my meta question is related to how terrible people are at actually buying and holding, right? They tend to panic and sell. So even with the knowledge that all this shit is going to happen, that the one guarantee is there's going to be a bunch of unmitigated catastrophe that is totally unexpected, how can you increase the likelihood that you will not respond in moments of panic by doing what cripples you financially?
So two parts of this. One is that even if you look at the periods that in hindsight we think were the greatest that existed, which for most Americans is the 1950s and the 1990s. That's what we remember as like the golden age of prosperity and happiness and peace. Even if you look at those periods, like in the 1950s, people were kids were doing nuclear bomb drills under their desks. And there was a lot of pessimism and negativity. Even if we know in hindsight it was great, at the time, by and large, they did not know that. Maybe it was good economically, but there was a lot to be worried about in the 1950s. Same in the 1990s, which we like today, it's like, oh, the booming 1990s, the bull market. But even like people forget in 1994, there was a big like interest rate calamity where a bunch of interest rates rose and the stock market crashed. And then in 1998, a big hedge fund went out of business and almost took the whole global economy down with it. Like there was a lot to worry about during these periods. So how do you protect yourself from that? How do you actually become buy and hold? I think there's one thing to do here. There's a friend of mine named Carl Richards, who's a financial advisor, and he has a quote where he says, risk is what is left over when you think you've thought of everything. I think that's the definition of risk is whenever we're done planning and forecasting, everything that's left over that we haven't thought about, that's what risk actually is. And the takeaway from that, the actual practical takeaway is that if you are only planning for risks that you can think about and you can envision and you can imagine, then 10 times out of 10, you're going to miss the biggest risk that actually hits you. The biggest risk is always something that nobody sees coming, including something like COVID, where it's actually not fair to say no one saw it coming, but by and large, it's like in financial circles, not a single investor in 2019 in their economic outlook had a viral pandemic as something that they were worried about. Not a single one. Or 9/11 or Lehman Brothers going bankrupt, like all the big events that actually mattered, it's pretty much true to say no one saw them coming. I think that's generally true. And therefore, the takeaway is you have to have a level of savings in your asset allocation that doesn't make sense. You have to have a level of conservatism that seems like it's a little bit too much. That's the only time that you know that you are prepared for risks that you cannot envision. And if you are only prepared for what you can imagine, again, you're going to miss the biggest risk every single time. Whenever people look at my asset allocation, if I share that with them, it looks a little bit too conservative. And they say, God, you could be taking a little bit more risk. And they're right. Like I probably could, but I want to be prepared for the risks that I can't imagine or the risk that like is possible, but like I don't want to even think about. It's too painful to think about. That's the only time that you can be prepared for the surprises in life. And I think most people, not all investors, but the majority of investors are not conservative enough. And I know like whenever I say that, they kind of shake their head like, come on, like, why don't you want to take risk? And once a decade, you learn why. Once a day, whether it's COVID or 9/11 or 2008, once per decade, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. I didn't see this coming. It was a calamity. And I either like ground myself into the floor and like I got wiped out, or I had a little bit of extra savings that got me through. So that's how I think about, how to stay in the game in a long-term history where history is a constant chain of surprises. That's the only way to do it.